Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jane Longhurst, Chief Executive of the MIA, and welcome to the fourth in our Extraordinary Matters series of events and webinars. Whilst the first in the series was a live face-to-face event, it was filmed and it's available on the MIA website along with all of the webinars in our COVID-19 support area. Please feel free to access these at any time. Before I start my intro, I've got a few housekeeping notes for you. I'm sure you're all familiar with Zoom by now, so I don't need to tell you where to find the Q&A button, but I will remind you to please put all of your questions to the panel through Q&A. When you do so, please select all from the drop-down so that other attendees can see the questions and give it a thumbs up if they're also interested in the answer. I'll be managing the questions and I will ask as many as I can throughout the session, so please ask away. So on we go. The 50-page plan to rebuild outlined the government's COVID-19 recovery strategy. It's a broad outline of the step-by-step lifting of restrictions, which currently notes hospitality as starting to reopen in July. The actual wording of the document states the ambition is to open at least some of the remaining businesses and premises that have been required to close, including personal care, hospitality, public places and leisure facilities. They should also meet the COVID-19 secure guidelines. We don't know at the moment what that will include. We don't know if that includes business meetings and event spaces, and we don't know if by accommodation providers they mean all hotels. It all seems a bit vague, but let's be honest, it has to be. No one knows how well this reopening plan will go. Will we have to step back at any point and lock down again? Will we be so successful that the steps can be sped up? Will event venues open in July with social distancing in place and possibly maximum numbers, or will the government ask us to wait longer? It's a complete unknown and it's completely out of our hands. If there are any indicators at all, it could be the furlough scheme. Its extension until July and then phased until October is the clearest indicator we're likely to get right now. So all we can do as a sector is prepare and hope for an early reopening, but be prepared to wait for the worst case. To help organisations prepare, the MIA is doing a number of things. This week, we will release our contract guidance and COVID clause designed to give bookers the confidence to sign contracts with you. We know they're reticent to do this, so my hope is this clause will help you achieve those much needed signatures. Early next week, we'll issue recommendations around hygiene and social distancing practices and the best way to prepare your venue to give clients the confidence that you're operating above and beyond a COVID secure way. We're doing this because we recognise that the government will not give us verbatim instructions about how best to operate a venue in the current climate. They will simply give us instructions for workplace safety. The work is being prepared for us by a consultant and will be issued as best practice guidance. It's not designed to replace your own protocols, but to enhance them. Today, we're sharing something with you that I hope will also help you to prepare. Today, we're going to hear from panelists from the UK, Greece, Croatia, and from a parallel sector about how they are preparing for reopening and recovery. There are huge amounts of learning to be taken from the best practice being operated by others in the UK and overseas, and I'm delighted to have brought these together for you today. Before I introduce you to our host for the morning, I just really want to say enjoy. And don't forget to download the sessions on the website. So let me now introduce our host, Mark Gallen, our fantastic facilitator and master of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That's a very kind introduction. Okay, welcome everybody to Extraordinary Matters Lessons for Recovery. So I'm now going to introduce, or rather our panelists are going to introduce themselves. So I'm just going to call their first name. Guys, remember, all we need is a brief description of your role and your business, just in about a minute. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. My name is David Taylor. I am the Chief Executive at a company called Adriatic Luxury Hotels. We're a collection of luxury hotels and villas, primarily in the Dubrovnik area in Dalmatia in southern Croatia. I've been here 9 months, and before that spent most of my career in the London market and the UK provincial hotel market, but a fairly seasoned hotel operator, I would say. Thank you.
Okay, that's nice and brief. Thank you very much, David. Okay, next up, Vasya.
Thank you, Mark, and good day to all from hot Greece. We have 35 degrees here today. It's summer already. For the last 5 years, I have the honor to be the executive director of Visit Greece DMC. We are based in Athens and we operate all over Greece, offering authentic experiences to corporate clients since 1991. We are working in tailor-made MICE events, and we are the only agency in Greece with a creative in-house team designing concept tours, team buildings, based on, of course, on the client's needs.
Okay, thanks, Vasya. Nicola? She's not unmuted. Hang on, Nicola.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm the Health, Safety, Security Director of the Legoland division of Merlin Entertainment. So I oversee safety for all of our resorts globally. That includes resorts all the way from California over to Japan, and also some new resorts that we're beginning to construct in New York and in South Korea. We've been involved in this pandemic since it all started in Wuhan. We have an attraction based in Wuhan, and we've seen it spread across the globe. And so I'm quite keen to share with you my thoughts today. Merlin Entertainments is more than Legoland. We have a number of other businesses such as Sea Life, Madame Tussauds, London Eye that you'll be familiar with, and other theme parks such as Alton Towers and Gardaland in Italy.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Danny?
Morning, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Danny Pecorelli. I am lucky enough to be Managing Director of Exclusive Collection. We have 6 luxury country house hotels, 2 spas, a golf course, a cookery school, and a pub, and we're a family business.
Okay, sounds great, Danny. Right, so we've got a mixed group of panelists, 2 people from outside the UK and also 2 hoteliers. We've got around about 12 or 14 questions spread across 5 topics. I'll just run through the topics with you and then we'll move on to the first question. So topic 1 is looking at the sort of the international situation. Number 2 is just a brief touch on some of the predictions around recovery. Topic 3 is all about confidence, customer confidence. Topic 4, the favourite of social distancing. And lastly, getting into the nitty-gritty of all those precautions. So I'm going to kick off with our first question. So David, Vasya, this question goes to you guys. So David, I'm going to bring you in first. So as you know, the UK remains in lockdown right now, but what was very interesting is that Croatia and Greece moved a lot quicker than us. So I'm led to believe. And you guys seem to have definitely a lot lower instances of the virus. So tell us briefly, what is the current situation in your respective countries? What we're curious to know here is that, you know, how far ahead are you of us? What government support have you had? You know, what's working, what's not working? David.
Thanks, Mark. The situation here is very positive. The total number of cases that Croatia has had is 2,228. We've had less than 100 fatalities. We had 2 infections in the whole country yesterday, but we're now going through a series of days without infection. I was fortunate in that I got back to the UK at the very beginning of March for a long weekend, landed back into Croatia, and within 24 hours, the borders were sealed. The country could see what was beginning to happen. They moved very swiftly. And within a few days of that, we were then asked to go into social isolation. It was pretty strict. And in fact, I think Oxford University have measured all measures across the world, and Croatia apparently had the strictest conditions. But it's without a doubt, it's worked extremely well. It's been 8-9 weeks of a fairly long road, We've been coming through the other side of that now for about 3 weeks. So lockdown was released in 3 stages. So having moved from just purely groceries and medicines, we've now gone into small shops, and then we've gone into larger stores, and now supermarkets and malls. And then yesterday, cinemas and theatres opened, which was great. So broadly, if I look out the window now, most of the city is operating pretty much normally. We have social distancing in place, and that's being retained. But other than that, we are, I would say, pretty confidently through the other side.
Very jealous. And I'm imagining that your business is still closed, David, isn't it? Hotels and venues are still yet to reopen.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Vasya, so same question.
Thank you, Mark. Allow me to say first that the Greek government had an amazing reaction to the first symptoms of COVID. Immediately after the first infection, they proceeded in lockdown. And on the other hand, the Greeks themselves treated the situation with an extraordinary caution and dedication to rules. And as you may understand, Greeks have ouzo in their veins beside, and not blood. So it's not very easy to stay at home. Indeed, the cases in Greece are very low, and I suppose maybe ouzo helped a bit in this. But today people are allowed to move freely. Since May 4th, all the measures have started to loosen up. Shops are reopening, restaurants will open next Monday, and hotels are scheduled to open on June 1st. Actually, yesterday we had the first domestic flights by our local air carrier, Aegean Airlines. We had a couple of videos in the YouTube, and things were running smoothly, of course, taking all the precautions needed. We still expect to hear the protocols and what will happen with international flights, how hotels will welcome guests, and all measures. Rumors has it that very soon the borders will open to receive European travelers, and tomorrow we will have the Prime Minister's announcements on this. I must admit that the most important decision the government took at this time is that they turned immediately to the scientific community to prevent the expansion of the virus, despite any political risk they might face later on. During this time, they tried to keep the employment steady. They offered a variety of measures to support businesses, giving the allowance to companies to reduce the rent, freeze any taxes, installments for a few months, and offer low interest loans. So you understand they tried very early to take all measures needed to assist businesses to keep working after the lockdown.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Vasya. David, did you have a similar support from the Croatian government?
Yes, we did, Mark. They were extremely proactive, and they've supported in a similar way to the UK. And to echo Vasya's comment as well, that the people here have been extraordinarily disciplined in terms of maintaining good practice in terms of isolation. And I think the government are very, very thankful for that, and went on record yesterday thanking the population for what they did and how they did it. So, the government have been very impressive here and have thought outside of the box on a number of occasions.
It's very interesting hearing both your views. I'm going to move on to another question, but that is very interesting. Thank you. Let's talk about recovery. So this question is for Danny and David, really just focusing on business events. So this is a prediction sort of thing. What types of business events do you think are going to come back first? If you can be quite specific. I think a lot of our audience are curious to see, who's going to move first. So in your opinion, Danny, what type of business events will come back first? If you can make a reference to numbers as well, that would help us.
So we're seeing, firstly, I should caveat this by we're actually focusing our recovery on UK domestic. And we see that very strongly. There's travel restrictions, we all know about that. But so the UK domestic market is going to drive it, be it leisure or meetings. We are getting very low levels of MICE inquiries, but we are getting those inquiries. with lots of spatial requirements. So the dynamics have changed. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. We're also lucky enough to have sports as a market segment, so sports teams, and from our specific niche, we have contract with the RFU. We have lots of football teams that stay for matches. Ascot is just by Pennyhill Park, and they're starting to run behind closed doors events. So our initial push, as well as some very small upscale board meetings of that level, will be a number of sports teams or groups of jockeys staying with us that need to have almost an exclusive area and a bit of privacy. So that's how we in our niche are seeing it.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. David, same question to you.
It's a similar response. We see quite a lot of early interest in terms of smaller meetings, smaller conferences, and particularly for us at the moment, incentive groups. We're limited by 40 delegates on any one event at the moment until we're more confident to increase that under guidance. But certainly there is a healthy demand beginning to emerge in terms of celebratory events as well, and weddings and family reunions and get-togethers, which is really quite interesting. I don't think we quite saw that, but it's beginning to, I think, express itself in the population, that people are relieved, they're happy, they want to get back to normal, and they want to be able to celebrate together. Okay,
so in summary, no big events. You're saying it's going to be smaller events. Can you give me an idea of kind of numbers that you anticipate? Sorry, an event with the limit on numbers that you anticipate recovering early.
Currently, it's 40 or less, Mark, until we get specific guidance telling us differently. We do have, however, some specific inquiries from larger corporates later in the year, and also from international government events, for example. But they are much later in the year, when I'm sure everybody will be more confident about hosting to higher numbers and being able to have more people together. But at this stage, it's very early steps, and the numbers are 40 or less, and we can't really go beyond that.
Okay. Thanks, David. Okay, let's move on. And actually, first of all, Jane, any questions? Okay.
No, nothing coming in yet. I'm sure there will.
Let's talk about confidence. So I'm going to ask you all of this question. So I'm going to start with Nicola, then I'm going to Vasya, then Danny, then David. But if you feel you're just repeating yourself, it's not a problem. So there's a lot of talk about rebuilding confidence amongst customers. And I'm using that as a generic term across all your businesses. So we're curious to know, what is your message currently to your customers? And how are you communicating that message in terms of security, health, safety, measures that you're putting in place? So Nicola, we're going to kick off with you.
Yeah, so as I say, we do operate globally, so we're at different stages in different places around the globe in this regard. Clearly, one of the most important things for us is following the advice of our local authorities, which is different in different regions. We're utilising quite a lot of our social media channels to promote what we're doing to reassure our guests that we're a safe place to visit. We're also using our websites as well, so we have various material produced. So if you, for example, you went to Merlin Entertainment's website, you'd be able to click on there and see some of the things that we're doing to reassure our guests that visiting our attractions is a great thing to do and a safe place to visit. In addition to that, we've also done some market research in terms of what do public want to see when they visit a visitor attraction. And some of those key things, which I'm sure many of you will probably be thinking about already, people want to see that we have enhanced cleaning regimes in place. They want to see lots of hand sanitizers. They want to see that we're enforcing social distancing. So we're really pushing our messages in that regard and making sure that our operational plans reflect what guests and consumers want to see ultimately.
Okay. Thanks, Nicola. So Vasya, same question. So what's your message? How are you communicating?
So Mark, at this point, Greece has proven that it is a trusted destination anyways. And I think we receive a marketing campaign without asking it. I've heard from friends that we play around the world with the work we did, with the precautions we take against the virus. So at the moment, we try to invest on the tourism of the future. Things are changing. We should change the way we are thinking. I agree with David that smaller groups will start arriving. And we are not used to that since we are working on the MICE industry. But we have to be ready. We are working with our social media a lot, with our website. We are changing the way of thinking on how we work with the bigger groups and how now we have to start working again. And I don't know if you're familiar with the actions that our tourism bureau took, like the Greece from Home initiative that promotes all islands and mainland destinations, and they can help you build your next trip to Greece from your screen.
Okay, all right, thanks, Vasya. So similar question to you, Danny. You know, what's your message around security, health and safety, and how are you putting it out there?
So I think I'd echo what Nicola said. A lot of it is very visual. A lot of it is making sure the customer is seeing things happening. We're also investigating, there's a lot of talk about kite marks or accreditation. The AA are looking at a hotel kite mark around cleanliness, because especially as an independent, how do you get that weight behind you that you're doing the right thing? UK Hospitality have been really fantastic in all of this. A lady called Kate Nichols representing hotels with the government. They're putting out protocols this week. So by the end of this week, they'll come out, and we see it as being very important, as well as a visual, as well as a social media. We want to get some of these kite marks or accreditations behind us. So there's almost that independent verification that you're doing everything you can. We've been lucky enough to have golf opened on the weekend, and so we've had our first customers. It's been quite rare after 2 months to actually see a customer walk through the door, but we've developed a lot of signage, but very on brand. So we've branded our signage in quite a quirky way, and that's really reassured our customers. And they've also appreciated, because it's been branded, they know it's been personalized and thought through. So rather than putting generic signs, the act of putting it into our language has made it be more meaningful to the customer.
I really like that, Danny. That makes a lot of sense to me. So the customer's branding is on the signage about social distancing. Jane, I can see you're looking for my attention.
Yeah, a couple of questions have come in. For David, first of all, it's a retrospective question about the statement about 40 or less. Is this because of the impact of social distancing, i.e. the maximum numbers possible in your venue, or is it a government declaration, or is it a company decision? And taking that into account, if it is about social distancing, how are you calculating the capacity of your meeting space?
To answer the question, Jane, it's not our decision. It's based on current epidemiological advice from the Croatian authorities. So across the country, they've limited, as part of the first stage of getting back to some sense of normality, a maximum capacity in any one meeting room of 40 people, even if that meeting room can take 2,000 people. So we have meeting rooms that are certainly capable of handling 300-400 people. But we take the steps as we're guided by the authorities. They've done a great job so far, so we've got every reason to be confident in their thinking. So yeah, we will follow their scientific advice, and as the capacity begins to grow, then we'll grow with that.
Okay, thank you. Any more, Jane?
Yeah, there is one which I would like to ask Nicola. Nicola, the COVID secure guidelines are a bit woolly in the UK, we think. So how are you preparing, and how far are you taking your risk assessments?
Great question. We've been working, as I say, working on this since back in January. We also have a trade association that we work with internationally called IAPA, which is the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. So we've been taking our experiences from what we've had over in places like China and Japan and Korea. We've been working with other theme park operators, and we've developed our own internal guidance on that. So with regards to risk assessment, that's really one of the first steps that we're taking. So every location is doing a risk assessment specific to every activity we do at our parks and our locations, and really making sure that we're looking at it from both a visitor and guest perspective, but also an employee and staff perspective, and making sure that we do everything that we can to both protect and reassure guests and employees working for us. So it's very, very crucial to us, and yeah, we will continue to do that in line with UK requirements as well.
Great, that's it. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Jane. David, I just quickly go back to Danny's point about this sort of kite mark accreditation. Do you guys have anything in Croatia, you know, like COVID secure kind of label that's been given to you by a third party?
So the situation is, in Europe, there are a number of bodies that can fulfill a certification process based on certain either health and safety or cleanliness standards. Some of the audience will be familiar with organizations like TUV in Germany, Bureau Veritas based in Paris, but they're global organizations. We work in any case with Bureau Veritas, but we're working at this stage to define what those standards needs to be. We're pretty much finished with that. We've had government advice in terms of how we should operate as well. Our own SOPs have been very rigorous, but the intention is to implement it and then work with the certification body to ensure that it's regularly audited independently, that our message to the market is that, first of all, this is a very great, remarkable destination to visit, but it's safe, and that the standards that we operate to are also safe. And don't just take our word for it. We are very quickly intending to get certification in place and rigorous audit processes to make sure that that happens. So yes, Mark, they do exist.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, in the UK, I'm definitely getting, Jane, I think we're definitely getting the impression that it is kind of work it out for yourselves. You know, that the government doesn't appear to be hand-holding or spoon-feeding us. But I think, going back to your point, Danny, there is definitely a need or requirement for some kind of accreditation. So I don't know, Jane, maybe that's another webinar perhaps, or another investigation that could be made. I'm going to move on now and talk about social distancing, which is obviously a massive subject. So this one's coming your way, Vasya, and back to you again, David. Don't worry, I've got questions for you, Danny, Nicola, around this as well. But at the moment, if you're thinking about reopening, there's a lot of sort of thought around PPE and all social distancing, but specifically, what can we learn? What can the UK learn about what is happening in Greece, Vasya, and also how does what you're doing affect your business model?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Actually, as an agency, we never closed officially since we had to handle our groups for this period of time and postpone them or cancel them or even advise them what we do. But at this point, maybe I should mention that after a decade of long economic crisis, the first signs of a recovery were finally starting to emerge for Greece and travel industry especially. Though the coronavirus pandemic swiftly brought this to an end, the first case in Greece reported in February 26th, and 2 weeks later, we were in a lockdown. I think what happened in Italy shocked the authorities, so they acted very quickly. And this is something we should take into account. As I said before, for Greeks, this is not easy, and this is a very, very, very new situation to everyone. So within 2 weeks, we shut all educational institutions, bars followed, restaurants, museums, the retail, the gyms. And Greece, you may understand that this was an economical close down, not only a lockdown, but a full economical stop. So by now,
sorry to interrupt you. Can you give us a little bit more of a view around the reopening? So when you're reopening, or your plans to, I know you don't have an actual venue, but in terms of like moving forward and engaging with your customers, what are your thoughts around PPE and social distancing? How is that going to happen in Greece? Forgive me, my original question might have been a bit clumsy.
Yeah. So I think slowly the individual traveling will start reopening, and the MICE will follow by fall. So for us, actually, we are getting ready for the fall to accommodate our guests. And now what we are doing is planning new projects and new, speaking with the hotels and how they will react. So we will follow them and will act based on the governmental announcements. As I said, tomorrow we expect them. So at the moment, there are only rumors on how we will react. But based on what I've seen, things will be completely different. I mean, even if you have a group, as David said, in a meeting room, you will need a meeting room of 200 people to accommodate a group of 30. So we have to get familiarized with that.
Okay, thank you. David, in the UK, there's lots to talk about capacity and what a nightmare it's going to be having, staff or even customers in PPE, social distancing. Tell us a little about what your plans are and how that's maybe affecting your business model.
I should begin by saying that the social distancing level is slightly different here to the UK. So the authorities have recommended a minimum distance of 1.5 meters rather than 2. That does actually change things in a positive way, I would say. I think there was a little bit of nervousness and anxiety about a full 2 meters. It literally reduces capacity quite seriously. 1.5 meters is less so. It's still, according to the authorities, an acceptable distance for people to be apart. And it's also easy to operate. So from a staffing point of view, we make sure that our staff obviously are fully equipped in terms of gloves and masks. We're not going as far as what we've seen in some markets where they've got full facial visors and PPE aprons and so on. There's a level of common sense here that says that fundamentally we are taking the precautions very seriously, but with a level of practicality as well. And obviously we've got things like disinfectant gels and hand sanitizers and so on, very easily accessible. But I think in terms of capacities, which is the root of your question, Mark, the 1.5 meters is helpful. It may be weather influenced because we do have quite a lot of outside terracing and outside space for diners, and that certainly helps. If we were just purely indoors, it would still put some pressure on us. But it's certainly something that we can operate with, and it shouldn't have that much of an impact on capacities as such.
Okay, that's good to hear. Are you sort of, when you're modeling your revenues, are you taking into consideration, the impact or effect the capacities may have?
Yes, we did, and we went through floor planning and mapping out tables and capacities and so on. And actually, the difference between 1.5 meters and 2 meters is pretty dramatic when you see it on a floor plan. So having now modeled all of that out, and our operations team are in the process of resetting restaurants and breakfast rooms and so on. We've got to a point where we're happy with it. We know we've got appropriate space around tables. We can keep things clean. But yes, in terms of modeling, it hasn't made that much difference to financial impact at all. Obviously, without tourists, there's a financial impact, but should tourists arrive, we don't believe that the social distancing as set in this country is a negative thing, whereas I can quite understand how it would be in other countries where it's a bigger distance. But different countries currently have different views on what that needs to be.
Thanks, David. That's really helpful. Okay, so Danny and Nicola, let's turn to the UK. I'm very curious, and I'm sure the audience are, how are you planning to manage social distancing in your businesses? So, Danny, if we could start with you, please.
The point was made earlier that the UK government seemed to be have given very, very little guidance, and I think the indications coming out are it's going to be very risk assessment based, and they're making lots of noises about it's not 2 meters at all times, and you have to risk assess all of the different areas that you operate in. We're very lucky. We've got lots and lots of space. A bit like David said, we've got lots of outdoor space. You know, we're in hundreds of acres. So we're just looking very much at giving private space to meetings, designated areas in every area. So almost isolating groups, even down to, it's been interesting, the first few inquiries I've been speaking to, separate toilets, separate breakfast rooms, and we're able to do that, and incorporating outdoor space within that, but with a wet weather provision, knowing the UK summer. So we're risk assessing each area. We're also working out that the balance between these visual sort of face masks and visors, you know, it still needs to be a pleasant experience, but delivered safely. So that there's also this innate conflict within that of offering a relaxing environment, but within the confines of doing it safely.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Danny. Jane, I know you got a question there.
Yeah, probably for both our hoteliers, actually. So with social distancing, there's a cost involved. You know, it is going to be reducing incomes. So are you looking to pass that on, or are you going to be absorbing it through efficiencies? How are you working it? Danny, probably first for you, around meeting space particularly.
We're not passing it on. I mean, it's not possible. We're going to add value by adding space in. You know, that's a definite. But primarily because initially we can. We're not going to be running on 100% occupancy. I wish we were. And we're making a commercial decision around, I'd rather have it coming to us and being able to, you know, having to take a hit on cost, but keeping people employed in the business, retaining jobs, and having the business with us.
Makes complete sense. Is the view similar from David?
The view is exactly the same. So we've got no intentions to pass any of that on. We're also very conscious that we work in a competitive market. And if our pricing suddenly spikes because of that, then, you know, we'll not be preferred destination of choice. So we have to be realistic, and we have to also understand that this current pandemic is causing huge economic impact that's likely to last for some years in terms of profitability of companies, the ability of consumers and companies to be able to pay for different things in different events. So I think by loading our prices up just to take into account of social distancing, it's likely to leave us uncompetitive in what will be in an increasingly competitive world.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think we could run a whole webinar on the topic of pricing. So I'm gonna put the lid on that box if that's okay, Jane. I'm gonna go back to Nicola. We haven't forgotten about you, Nicola. So Nicola, obviously you're in a very different business with, you know, just random people wandering around. How are you planning to manage social distancing? And also, what are you looking to take from your colleagues internationally? Because obviously they, I guess, are doing things differently.
Yeah, so we do have experience already. We've opened up during this process in Japan, in Legoland Japan. We've had experience over there in China, in South Korea. We've had some experience now in Germany and also North America. So so we know what's working, and we've refined what we're doing. Firstly, it is about limiting capacity. So we need to understand, you know, what the measurements are, and they do vary between country, but making sure that we really understand how many people we can have in different locations. The theme park industry in particular is very lucky in the regard that we have a lot of outdoor circulation spaces, so we have a lot of space to play with, so in that regard it doesn't impact us as much. What you'll see as you go on our rides and you know, in our parks, for example, you might have more space, so you might have a ride vehicle to yourself rather than having to share with another family, or there might be a space, you know, an empty seat that's next to you on a roller coaster. Restaurants where we'll have spacing between tables, obviously to follow social distancing. So there's a lot of things that we are doing. You know, you'll see floor markings in queue lines, big circles or footprints on the floor, so people really know where to stand. But our experiences in South Korea have also told us that culture is quite important. So we're trying to develop that culture amongst our teams through staff training. You know, what is social distancing? What do they need to do to be self-aware, to protect themselves? But also, how can they help encourage the public to understand what we're trying to do? And certainly in Denmark, we have we will be starting with corona officials, so people who will be walking around the parks actively trying to make sure that we don't have overcrowding in places as well. So a lot of different things, and hopefully you know, some of you will be able to take some of our experiences in your own places.
I like the sound of corona officials. I want to come back to that particular point in a moment, but I'm getting a few themes coming through. People are talking about, you know, isolating groups, utilizing outdoor space, risk assessments galore, because, you know, I mean, I can tell you now, I mean, I live in Bath and people are still wandering around bumping into each other. So we're never going to be completely 100% social distancing and lines on the floor. So let's dig a little bit deeper to some of the precautions, if that's okay. David, let's talk about catering. What, if any, concerns do you have when it comes to catering? I'm talking about event catering here, or restaurants. Well, in particular for business events. You know, what are your concerns and what are you trying to do about them?
Well, first thing needs to be said is that buffets are pretty much a no-no, because it involves a lot of people going to one point to try and fill a plate. So that's just not going to happen for us for at least the short to the medium term. We are moving very much to a plated service process. So we will provide the ability for someone to choose their food, and we'll then deliver that from the kitchen, directly from the kitchen to the individual. So from a catering perspective, it will be much more tightly controlled. So things like salt and pepper pots and stuff like that, they won't be there. They'll be in the kitchen. If you need them, then we're happy to get them, and they all have to be cleaned and sanitized as soon as they go back. So I think the customer will see less in terms of things to touch and things to pick up and so on. It will be more controlled. We will be consciously trying to make sure that we maintain social distancing as we're fulfilling those events. It's never easy because people do get up and bump into each other and so on, but It is important that we make sure that we try and follow the guidance we're given, and that whilst I keep hearing that there is very specific guidance for us, don't get me wrong, we've had to go away and decide very explicitly what we think we should be doing and how. The government here gave recommendations, and then we adopt that and follow it in. So I think everybody's in a similar position, but it's just got to be safe and it's got to be distanced, and that responsibility is down to us, and we have to hope that delegates in particular are mindful that they also have to follow a certain discipline when they're attending events.
Okay, that's interesting, especially your last point about certain discipline. So I want to pick up on the point of maybe delegates' behaviour, or call them customers. So this question is for Vasya and Nicola. Now I know you're not hoteliers, but obviously you've got Vasya. You're obviously working with hoteliers, but there inevitably will be some customers who are not going to adhere to social distancing. So here's two questions for you both, starting with Vasya. You know, do you think it's your responsibility to manage that behaviour? And also, how are you planning on educating your customers about that behaviour?
So I think it's our responsibility to train our or to inform better our customers before the trip, before the arrival of the measures of the country and how they need to behave. But I understand there will be people that they won't, or they won't read them, or they will not follow them. Our staff will be there to, you know, to put them in order, but definitely I think we don't have the, it's not easy to put them back in order, you know? If someone doesn't want to follow, he will not follow. This is something that will happen.
A tricky situation, isn't it? I mean, in the UK, there's a man that's been arrested 9 times for violating social distancing. So, you know, inevitably there's going to be people like that. So, Nicola, do you have any other suggestions around this? About, you've got your corona officials. You know, they sound great. What are they up to?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I say, it's very much the corona officials. You won't be walking around the park looking at policemen. They are just our team, our management team, who are visible and you know, actively making sure that, you know, people around the parks are not overcrowding. And again, if there are issues, it's about managing that delicately and politely, and trying to you know, resolve the situation in that manner. I think in terms of prior to coming, you know, there's other things that we'll be doing, like educating via safety films and things like that. So, you know, members of the public can, before visiting, can see what it would be like to come to the theme park and to see the things that they would expect. We're very used to dealing with rules and regulations, as you can imagine, in our industry with rides and attractions. We have to make sure rules and restrictions are enforced all the time. So, you know, we will manage it to a certain extent, but we do expect our visitors to come and understand social distancing, and that will be in terms and conditions. So I think it will be managed very well. I think everybody wants to be safe and healthy in our parks.
Okay, thanks for that. Danny?
So picking up on the food point and the point that everybody is going to behave slightly differently. We're going down a route of offering meetings almost a menu and a tick box. So, for example, do you want mineral water in your meeting room? And obviously we won't put large bottles because they're shared. We'll put individual bottles. Do you not want it? We've got 3 or 4 different lunch options. We've got bento boxes. We've got bowl foods. Do you want your coffee break served or not served? Because actually that might be safer, but the customer's going to have the choice. And if it is served, our member of staff will be wearing gloves, will be wearing a face mask. And so we're giving the customer the choice, but only giving them choices that we consider to be safe. So within that, because this is so open to interpretation, and the customer's perception of what's safe is going to be slightly different as well.
I think that's really helpful advice, Danny. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about employees, because we've talked a lot about customers so far. So this question again is going to Danny, Nicola, David. What kind of measures are you looking to put in place that's going to protect your employees? I mean, some of you have mentioned training. So tell us a bit more about what you're actually doing, because it's important that if you're going to go to work, that you feel safe and you feel confident. You don't want to feel like you're working in the NHS. If you don't have enough PPE, that sort of thing. Can you elaborate on that point? Let's start with you, Danny.
I could show you about a 300-page internal document on this one. I think we're looking at everything. That there's the physicals that have been talking about, sanitizers. We're having to make difficult decisions on things like benefits that the staff have had. They've always had free meals, but we're going to open up without staff canteens providing food, because we don't have vending machines. But I was hearing on the news last night that a Jaguar Land Rover opening up without vending machines in their canteens. So we're really looking at the micro detail. We're going to have to accept, particularly with the back of house sales, the sales teams, the accounts teams, the maintenance teams looking at different shift patterns. That's going to become a really big area about having less people and challenging those, which is going to cause some of the teams. It could be an opportunity with childcare, but it might also be a challenge for some of the teams. And I think good, solid communication. We've got a fantastic internal app that we use called Beekeeper, that we can communicate to all members of the team, and we're constantly telling them what we're doing and involving them in a decision process.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Fassi, I'm going to bring you in just to sort of give us a view on what's happening in Greece. How are employees being protected and trained?
So same here, Mark. They everywhere you go, people are wearing masks. I mean, the employers, they're wearing gloves. In the supermarkets, in the coffee house, even if you get into the metro, you see the ticket masters who wear their gloves, their masks. And again, I mean, it's surprisingly for this country that people behave. I'm sorry I mentioned this too many times, but this is true, right? So taking a bit from the last question, we try, I mean, the government tries very hard to train people and how they behave. So when travelers start flowing back to Greece, I think they will get into the mood. You see, when you see those people to behave, when you see the hotels to behave, when you see the museums to behave, they will do the same. And yesterday, the Acropolis Rock started working. It was the first visit. And the president of democracy went there, and she was with her mask, and the guide was with her mask, and they had 1.5 meter distance. So, I mean, this is the phase we saw outside of Greece.
Okay, thanks, Vasya. Jane?
Yeah, there's a suggestion actually for Nicola to give Corona officials taser guns to make visitors behave. I thought it was worth sharing. But also a question for Nicola. You mentioned spacing between tables, but what other measures have you put in place in relation to your catering operations?
Again, it depends. We've put more emphasis and focus on kind of takeout options. So they're kind of prioritised as something that people can grab and take and sit on a table outside. But similar to what David mentioned, not doing buffets. We're concerned about the risk of buffets primarily. So a lot of service to people instead. I think that's probably the main things I can share.
Thanks, Nicola. Jane, any more questions?
One that I want to keep for the end, which actually is a really good finishing question for everybody.
Okay, David, if it's okay, I'd like to go back to you just on employees. Have you got employees expressing any concerns about their own safety? And again, what kind of training are you putting in place?
I'll address the training first of all, because I think that's probably the most important element. So all of our employees, without any exception, will be fully trained in terms of COVID-19 preparedness, disinfection and sanitization. And everybody is aware that we'll be looking for external, independent, regular audit. So they need to be very comfortable in the workplace to understand how to operate in that new world. Everybody is actually very positive about it. They see us as responsible employers wanting to do the right thing for our people. We've made sure that they will all have appropriate protection as needed for the role that they have. And they're being gradually brought back into the workplace as we start to prepare and get ready to begin to open hotels. So very similar to Greece, we're looking at early June, and we've had at least 5 or 6 weeks preparing for it, because it is a line-by-line process in terms of exactly what happens in the operation front of house and back of house. And I think because everybody knows that we've been doing that, and we've had people involved and we've communicated to them, they are confident that we're in a good place to do this well.
Okay, thank you, David. Jane, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I see we've got a few minutes left. Did you have your final question?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's a question for everybody, so I think it will take a few minutes, actually. It's a really good question for everyone. What lessons has our industry so far learned that can help us manage more efficiently the next emergency?
So when you say,
I don't know who wants to take it first.
Sorry, Jane, when you say our industry, obviously we've got Nicola in a slightly different industry. Should we rephrase it slightly to their industry? And Nicola, are we okay to kick off with you? So what lessons have you learned so far? If you had to sum that up into maybe your top 3.
I think certainly when we first heard this emerging out of Wuhan, I know that certainly me being based in the UK, I had a view that maybe it's just another flu, another cold, and I think a lot of people had that view internationally until it got worse and worse. And I think really making sure that you don't underestimate these issues. So we did have plans and procedures in place for a lot of these crises that we would deal with, but I think it's really making sure that you listen to what's happening on the front line at the locations, and make sure you're able to react quickly.
Okay, I get that completely. I think a lot of us fell into that particular trap. David, same question for you.
I tell everybody here, don't be surprised to be surprised, because we just don't know what's around the corner. So with that in mind, we all have to think in a very mobile way. We've got to be dynamic in terms of what we do and how we do it, and we've got to be prepared to do the unexpected. And it's clear we're already beginning to see things happening here that have surprised us as well, coming out the other side. So we have to make sure that we find a way that we keep within the business that curiosity, that inquisitiveness to just react differently, behave differently, and be prepared for the unexpected, I guess. So finally, I would say the one thing that has really helped us is that we've had many potential situations where we could have spent a lot of time making various decisions and doing various things, but we all agreed as a management board from day one that we would be decisive in what we did and how we did it. And we've lived by that. So every day, if we need to make a decision, we will make a decision. And I think that's really helped. It's helped us stay very clear and very focused.
Good advice. Thank you, David. Fassia, same question. What's the top thing that you think you learned from the situation?
Yeah. I agree with Nicola and David in the most things they said. I think prevention is the best reaction here. I mean, we should see what's happening. We should measure our steps, what we are to follow, and of course, never to give up. because I know many agencies, many hotels, many people said, okay, and now what? I think the show must go on here, and we have time, and this is the gift we were given with this virus, the time to reevaluate what we are doing, measure our next steps, and take our next actions.
Okay, thanks, Vasya. And Danny, you get the last word.
It's a great question, actually. I think my lessons, a lot have been around leadership. I think creativity, we've had to be so creative coming up with the solutions. And I also think planning without any of the facts, because there are so few facts out there on COVID-19, on what how the customers are actually going to react when they come through the doors. All the government guidelines, they're not giving us any information. So trying to be proactive and provide solutions, being creative and planning without that information, we've been able to do it, but it's changing your mindset to do that.
Okay, thank you, Danny. I'm going to bring it to a close there. Before I hand over to Jane for a final word, can I just thank you all, David Taylor, Vasya Berilacki, Nicholas Sobor, Danny Pecorelli. We've really enjoyed listening to your views. You've provided great insights and a lot of helpful tips. So thank you for your time. David, I know you need to head off to a board meeting shortly, so we're going to hopefully finish in a few minutes. Jane, over to you.
Thank you. And Mark, as usual, absolutely first class. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm sorry we weren't able to answer all of the questions. There were so many. I mean, it's a really active session. So brilliant, absolutely wonderful. We'll be continuing to do more of these as we move forward. You know, we're not there yet. We will get through this. Just keep positive, people. We are going to get there. So thank you again, panelists, and see you all again soon. Bye.